So, it is my great pleasure to have Amy and Manon here again. This is a third or fourth year in a row, I think we've done a gardening series. Manon started gardening in 2005 when her daughter asked a question about food, but Manon did not know the answer. She's been looking for answers and sharing them with our community ever since. After studying seed saving with local gardener and nationally recognized seed saver Bill McDorman, Manon became a master gardener and helped establish Valley Victory Gardens. She is the director of the Wood River Seed Library and has taught classes on gardening locally for many, many years. Amy Mattias is program director for the Sun Valley Institute for Resilience, and in that role she helped launch the 5B Resilience Gardens collaboration in 2020. She serves on the Blaine County Food Council and is a board member of the Idaho Center for Sustainable Agriculture. Amy follows regenerative practices rooted in traditional ecological knowledge in her own garden and recently received a permaculture design certification from the Permaculture Institute of North America. She has worked with local food movement for over 10 years and is committed to sharing her knowledge of and passion for growing food in our community. And I can say unequivocally that you couldn't have two better leaders and teachers as these two gals. So thank you again for being here tonight, and let the show begin.
Thanks, Kristen. I think Manon and I are going to remove our masks while we present to you so everyone can hear us more clearly. We're talking about seeds and soil. It's exciting. It's a great time of year to talk about this kind of stuff. So thank you for being here. I'll quickly just mention what 5B Resilience Gardens is, so that can kind of frame our conversation today. In 2020, we really saw there being a need to build collaboration around gardening. More people were interested in gardening, new people were moving into our community and needed to learn how to successfully garden here. So a group of us got together to create this wonderful collaboration to provide educational services, resources, and community around gardening. And we have just 3 guiding principles. I'm going to use the fancy laser pointer here because I have it. We have 3 guiding principles: food production, soil health, and pollinator habitat. We did a series, I believe it was last year, about those 3 topics. So if you want to learn more about what those guiding principles are, you can watch those recordings through the Haley Public Library. But they're pretty self-explanatory, I think. So today we're going to talk about seeds, sourcing, selecting, and starting seeds, and then we're going to talk about soil. I think we're actually going to talk about soil first. Soil, making it, buying it, and regenerating it, and then we're going to do a little demonstration. Manon makes a potting mix using some of the materials here to start seeds in, so we're going to demonstrate that for you all as well. And then we'll have a lot of time for discussion afterwards. But if you have questions that come up during our conversation, raise your hand and jump in, because we like to involve you all. We're not like here to lecture at you. We're here to have a conversation about gardening, so your participation is part of that. Soil, buying it. Some people are just gonna buy the soil. So there's just some things that I thought we should talk about to consider if you are gonna be buying your soil. So some of the things that I look for is what's called OMRI. You can see the logo right here. It's an organic. It means that it's organic certified, essentially. So that prohibits things like pesticide residues or neonicotinoids in it. It also prohibits bio waste. So some conventional non-OMRI listed products might have like human sewage sludge in it. That might not be a problem for you. I prefer to avoid it, so that's going to be my choice. Also think about your budget. If you're filling like raised beds, which a lot of people do with bagged soil, it's going to end up being pretty expensive. So can you get a truckload of soil brought into your site instead? And those are options from our local garden centers. And then also to think about your existing soil. What kind of soil do you already have on your site? Maybe you've been gardening for a while and you already have great soil. Maybe you're on a brand new plot and you need to look at what type of soil you have and think about how to amend it. We've had talks really focused on the soil, so we're not going to go in depth unless people have questions about their specific soil. Also thinking about what your timeline is, because you can amend your soil for this gardening season. You can buy soil for this gardening season, or if you already have a productive garden, there's amendments that you can make, like adding a little bit of compost to jumpstart your soil. And those are all items that you can purchase. Do you want to add anything about buying soil?
Yeah. Some people, sorry, some people think that the soil you buy is better than your soil you have. I don't believe that. I believe in building the soil that you have. If the soil is too compact, you decompact it. If it's too clayish, you amend it with something. If it's missing something, you amend it. But oftentimes the soil you buy has been cooked, which kills the microbiome in it, right? And when you develop your own soil, you want to increase and develop a very healthy microbiome. That's what gives us the microbiome in our gut, and our planet is desperately using its microbiome.
Living organism. Organisms.
Microorganisms.
The latter, yes.
Living organisms.
Microorganisms are being killed by all the glyphosate, which is actually an antibiotic, and it kills bacteria, the good ones and the bad ones, but it kills everything. So the soil you have that you regenerate with all kinds of good techniques is so much better than the soil you bought. The soil you can buy, especially the one in bags. So considerations are, well, if you don't have already a soil, or you're starting your garden for the first time, yeah, when I started my garden for the first time, I got a truckload. But since then, I just make compost and add compost to it every year and develop the microbiome.
Yeah, and just one thing to piggyback off what Manon mentioned about if you are killing your bacteria, you're killing the good and the bad. 99% of that bacteria, the fungi, the nematodes, all those living things in your soil are good guys. A lot of people don't think about that. We're really afraid of things when they say bacteria, but a lot of that bacteria is beneficial bacteria. So you're killing the bad guys, which are few, and all the good guys, which are plenty. So now we'll talk about regenerating it, because this is what Manon and I both prefer to do in our own gardens. So I just want to mention that soil is a living entity. There's biological aspects of it, there's chemical aspects of it, and geological aspects of it. So people think like sand, clay, loam, that's what makes up soil. Rocks, minerals, microbes, bacteria, fungi, nematodes, arthropods like worms and beetles, that's all part of soil. So soil is alive, and we degenerate soil when we do things like overly till, when we apply pesticides, when we apply synthetic fertilizers, when we leave bare ground and watch it erode away, if we overwater and then it compacts. All those things degenerate our soil, but we can regenerate our soil through, these are 5 principles to regenerative agriculture or regenerative soil management, as I like to look at it. So reducing and eliminating disturbances talks about tillage. It also talks about those chemical synthetics that we could add on to our soil. Armoring the soil surface is mulching it or cover cropping it, so you reduce that bare soil. Keeping living roots in the ground. That's really speaking to feeding the microbiome, because the roots actually shed food and sugars to the living organisms under the ground. Promoting biodiversity, grow all sorts of things, because that's growing all sorts of things beneath the soil surface as well. So we want diversity above and below. And then this one's a little bit more complicated for home gardeners, integrating livestock. So I interpret it as adding animal-based nutrients from manure, compost, worm bins, fish meal, bone meal, etc. And that really jump-starts the soil microbiome as well. Yes?
I'm sorry, the eliminating, I know we're not talking about soil too much, but eliminating disturbances, since I've always thought you're supposed to till your soil.
Yeah.
So what's the happy medium?
Okay, so I'm going to repeat the question for our audience. Thank you for that reminder. So the question was Conventionally speaking, we talk about tilling the soil and getting it prepped for planting. How is that different, or why do we talk about reducing or eliminating disturbances? So I think in a lot of people's minds, a clean, bare, smooth soil looks great. It's actually not as alive as chunky, thick, mushy gushy soil. So people talk about your soil should look like cottage cheese when you pick it up. Those are called soil aggregates. There's actually like fungal glue in there that's holding things together. So it's holding on to nutrients, it's holding on to water, it's also holding on to oxygen. Plants need all those things to survive. So while visually it looks different than what we're used to seeing and what we might aesthetically appreciate, it's better for the plants that you're gonna grow. So I would say that if you're prepping your garden for your first time ever and you have sod grass, you might need to rototill that. But you don't want to get in the habit of rototilling every year, because every time you rototill, without getting too far into the science, you're churning up everything and exposing nutrients to oxygen, which allows a flush of nitrogen, but then it's gone. You're also compacting the soil, so you'll eventually get a hard pan where the roots can't penetrate through. And then when you're tilling, you're also exposing all of that to sunlight, so that's gonna heat up your soil and dry it out. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, the industry uses tilling. The view of agriculture has been often that this is dead, dirt is dead. and you just need to rototill it, add some nutrients, and plant seeds, and water a lot. You know, that was the view of agriculture for a long time, and now we're more conscious about the fact that, oh, there's microorganisms in the soil. That's what keeps us alive, actually, and we're destroying the microorganisms by doing that over-tilling or letting the field being exposed to the elements, and then, oh, it doesn't matter because next spring we'll rototill it and add all kinds of stuff to it. Well, why kill all the microbiome in it for 6 months and then add chemicals or you know, have to buy something to add to the soil when it's already there? All you have to do is nurture the soil, and you don't have to do all that. The tilling, to some extent, as a gardener, the tilling is there to loosen up your soil. And bring air into the soil. But you don't want to over-till more than you have to. You may have to at the beginning to incorporate other things into it to loosen it up, but there are other ways also than rototilling. There's forking, which is really good. And as Amy said, when you turn the soil, the soil has, let's say you have roots in the soil about 10 inches or a foot. The microorganisms at the top are different than the microorganisms at the bottom. When you turn that around, you're disturbing all that, and it has to re-establish itself. So why kill something in the first place? Instead, you know, let nature do its thing, and don't disrupt it, and it'll give you a better soil.
Did that answer your question? Okay, I know we just said a lot, so hopefully.
Somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, okay. And we could talk more about that if you want to. Yeah, Pamela?
I have a question. We put in raised beds last year, so it was the first year we bought Wynn's soil up in the valley. I had a really great season. Everything grew beautifully. Now, this year, I don't know how to start again, so we covered it with leaves, the raised beds, 4-foot by 10-foot raised beds, and I've just let them sit. I haven't done a darn thing, haven't touched them. So what I'm looking for tonight is how do I start again with the leaves that are on top? My husband and I, we come from Arizona, where I'm a master gardener, we always use a pitchfork and turn things. But now you're saying don't turn? And I'm assuming our soil is frozen, but it's going to unfreeze.
Well, especially if you have a raised bed.
Manon, can you repeat the question first for our live audience?
4 feet by 10 feet raised, 4 feet tall.
So the question is, if you have a raised bed, she has raised beds, she bought some soil last year for the first time, for the first year, and then she covered it with dead leaves for the winter and hasn't done anything to it and is asking what she has to do to it now in the spring to start the gardens.
We would turn it.
Yeah.
We would garden it much
So
longer.
there may be different answers to that, and Amy may give you a different answer. I would kind of remove the dead leaves from the surface when you're ready to start gardening, or push them aside and maybe add them if you need them later. But typically I take them and I put them in my compost pile. They're already partially decomposed. And then you want to make sure that your bed is loose enough. The fact that it's a raised bed, you haven't been walking on it, so it hasn't, hopefully it hasn't compacted too much, although the snow load, the ice may have compacted it. So you can take a fork and kind of fluff it a little bit if you need to, if you find that it's compacted.
Okay. But don't turn it. You don't want me turning the roots over and all of that like we always do.
You don't want to turn it, yeah. No. But
I'll
you
give
want
you
to.
a tiny different answer.
Okay.
I would
but-
leave the leaves on there. I would feed it with some sugar, so like molasses or diluted milk or honey. That revamps up the microbes. So if you have active microbes and arthropods in your soil, your leaves should be mostly gone at the end of the season. If they're still there, boosting the microbiome of it and the activity, which you can do through feeding sugar, that will get them activated and start to decompose things.
Do you want me to turn them a little bit or no?
I wouldn't turn it at all. So like if anyone ever has had
it acts as a mulch. The dead leaves act
and a habitat
as a mulch.
and a habitat for bugs and things that are going on. And there's different, like Manon was saying, there's things that live in the top part of the soil and further down. Those things that live in the top part of the soil, like if you think about worm bins, those are leaf litter bugs. So they're taking all that stuff and eating it and bringing it down, and that's just going to add nutrients and add organic matter deeper into your soil. One of the things I like to do with my leaves is I shred them so there's more surface area to help them break down better. Yeah, and you can easily do that with a lawnmower. If you have a lawnmower in a bag, you can just go over your leaves with that, and then you have the shredded leaves, and even in a compost, that'll decompose them faster.
What's
too.
the sugar and the molasses? What's that? I don't know anything about that. Did you make that up?
The question was, what's up with the sugar and the molasses? What does that do? It feeds the soil microbes. So carbon, it really depends on, I can't give you an exact, I would say like dilute 1 part molasses with 20 parts water. Start with that. Same thing with milk.
Not straight
honey.
molasses.
Yeah, not straight molasses. Batch trap molasses, because that's going to have some more nutrients in it as well. So the microbes eat carbon. Carbon is essentially sugar, if you think about it in a really basic way. So when we add sugar, we're adding a food. A way to do that without adding sugar is living roots in the ground, because roots decompose as sugar and then they're eaten and churned. Yeah.
So the molasses and the sugars, it's a modified version of a compost tea. So compost tea is you take compost and you have a liquid compost that you let ferment for a while, and then you add that to your garden. Well, a lot of recipes now are you make compost tea and you add some sugars to it to actually activate.
So you could add compost tea and sugars, worm casting juices and sugars. All that stuff is lovely.
That's what
Alfalfa meal or seaweed, sugars added to it.
Nothing now.
So I would say she has a different way, but it depends what you're going to plant in it. Sometimes the leaves will hide some of the little bugs that might eat all of your lettuce if you leave all the dead leaves there. So, and it depends how much material. My garden is covered with big pieces of plant material. So I remove that and I put that in my compost. And I do leave some leaves in there, but it depends what you're going to plant and at the time that you're planting, you may want to push that aside, plant your seeds, cover with a little more soil, and then cover up with, again, with some
It's only the
leaves.
second year.
Another question?
Yeah, I'm afraid we're going down the soil rabbit hole, but what about if your trees have aphids? Should you not use those leaves, or will those aphids die out over the winter?
So the question was, if your trees have aphids, are they going to live on the leaves and be there next spring? I'm going to argue that's more of an entomology question than a soil question.
The aphids are in the soil, actually.
And
They go in the soil for the winter.
I'm going to throw you a big curveball and tell you that healthy plants will not be eaten by aphids. And there's a lot of scientific research that shows that. They will not be damaged by healthy plants. That doesn't mean that plants are easy to get healthy. You need the healthy soil to grow healthy plants. I do what's called trap cropping. So if I see a plant like dill or alfalfa covered in aphids, I actually leave that there, and it doesn't bother any of my other plants because my other plants are healthy enough to deter it. That has to do with like the phytonutrients and constituents in the leaves of the plant itself, and the aphid digestive system cannot go through, like they can't digest complex plant material.
And another aspect is, like, I have fruit trees, and aphids are very attracted to fruit trees because they like the sweetness as much as we do. So I don't go out of my way to use these leaves in my garden. I choose. When my husband goes out to rake, I say, okay, there's a good pile of this kind of leaf there, throw them in my garden, but not these leaves. So yeah, you can be selective on what kind of leaves you put in there if you have that choice.
Any other questions?
No, let's go to the next slide.
We could talk about soil for a long time. Definitely check out the other webinars that we've hosted specifically about soil. So next, we're going to talk about making potting mix. I brought it last year. It's not even opened because I didn't use it, but I bought it just in case. You can buy potting mix, or you can make it. And Manon is going to demonstrate making potting mix.
And can I just explain what the difference is between seedling mix, which is what you use to start your seeds. A potting mix, you can buy something called a potting mix that goes in a pot, or a bigger pot. And now they started selling something called raised bed mix. What's the difference between all those things? Well, it's basically the same kind of mixture. It's something light. It's usually soil-less, like they don't put sand or dirt from the soil in it. Some have some soil, but most don't. The main difference is the texture. The seedling mix will be finer. The potting soil will be kind of medium, and the raised bed mix is coarser. But if you look at the ingredients, they could be the same. They could differ, but they could be the same. They also differ in the fertilizers that may be added to them.
So this one has none because the seed has everything it needs to grow within the seed casing. But as soon as it puts off leaves, it needs nutrients. So that might be the difference between seeding and potting in this demonstration, because you have nutrients in yours. This is just perlite and peat moss.
Yeah.
And a wetting agent.
Yeah, wetting agent. Yeah,
Because it's dry and cooked.
They dehydrate everything, so it's lighter to carry, to transport from one part of the world to another part of the world. But it kills the microbiome by dehydrating. The microorganisms need moisture. If you dehydrate it completely, then there is very little microbiome left. So that's one thing to consider. I always add some compost, some live compost that I make to that. When I buy something in a bag, I always add some compost, water it, and nurture to nurture my microbiome. But when you start seeds, you don't need fertilizer for the first 2 weeks, usually approximately. You don't need fertilizer. The seed has everything it needs to grow. And after that, you can start fertilizing. And in my demonstration, I will use a fertilizer, which is a mineral fertilizer, which is different than a fertilizer that is readily bioavailable to the plants. The minerals that are contained in this fertilizer recipe, it's not soluble in water. Therefore, it needs microorganisms to actually digest these or degrade these minerals, transform them into a substance that the plant can absorb. So this is really, these are minerals. It's not alive, they're minerals. And it's the bacteria in the soil that takes these minerals and slowly make them kind of soluble, transform them into a substance that the plant can eat. If you use a chemical fertilizer, it's soluble and it can be absorbed right away by the plant, all of it. It's too much for the plant at once, really. And you end up with plants that are really big, but the nutritional value in it is questionable because they haven't had time to absorb the minerals.
And then it washes away. The nitrogen washes away. And it pollutes our rivers and our streams and our ponds and our lakes. Phosphorus too. That's why we want the slow release. And they do this fun exchange. So the plant gets this through the microbes, but the plant's giving it sugars to feed the microbes. So there's an exchange happening under our soil that we cannot see. And that's why this type of mineral or nutrient mix is so much better, not only for your plants, but for your soil health too.
And another element, I was reading yesterday about the green sand, which is not shown here, but I often add green sand
it's
to
right
my...
there.
Oh, is it there? Okay. The green sand, it increases the population of bacteria that slowly dissolves the minerals. And then these microorganisms die, and they become kind of a compost themselves. Their dead bodies become organic matter that increases the population of other microorganisms. So other microorganisms will feed themselves off this decomposing first level microorganism, and they will create other microorganisms that will help to add nutritional value to the plant. So I mean, this goes on and on and on, and unfortunately the industry has ignored that for so long, to the point where this soil on the planet is almost dead.
I don't know if you heard Pamela's question. Where do you get green sand?
I got it from a local nursery, local garden center.
Oh, like Webb?
I can't remember.
Webb or somebody local.
Or Sun Valley, maybe in, yeah, it was either one of those.
And if they don't have it, ask them for it, because when we ask for things, they'll start to stock it.
And at this time of year, it may be hard to get because they haven't received their stocks yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's very important in the fall to stock up on everything gardening you need to start seeds, because at this time of year, they don't have it yet. And if you go to these, they'll say, oh, we'll get it later, we'll get it later. So, but if you buy a bag of green sand, I bought that bag 12 years ago, and I'm still going on it. So it lasts a long time. You don't need a lot of it.
Yeah, so this would make, what, 4 cups of fertilizer, and the potting mix says a dusting of it?
So when I make the fertilizer, it goes into a jar about this big. I make a big jar, and then I just need a dusting at a time.
And you could probably dust, if you had raised beds, you could dust this fertilizer in the springtime in there to give it a little bit more boost too.
Along with the molasses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, do we want to move this forward?
Are we ready for the
Yeah,
demonstration?
can everyone see okay? Okay,
Okay.
we'll move it forward a little bit.
The bag is gonna fall.
It's because it's frozen in the bottom because it was not used and it won't stand up straight.
So we're doing. So the fertilizer, we'll start with that. So I have 4 bags here. Blood meal. Okay, we'll start with blood meal. The blood meal adds nitrogen. That's the main thing that you get from blood meal. It's a natural source. It's made from blood from animals, and it's organic. I would not want blood from animals that weren't organically fed, but that. Okay. The second one, the rock phosphate. The phosphate adds phosphorus. So when we have an NPK, N is nitrogen from the blood meal. P for phosphorus. So the phosphorus is from a phosphate. So if you get the rock phosphate, I think it's this one, rock phosphate. And these are powdery things. They're all powdery things. And I do wear a mask when I handle them because they create a lot of dust. And it may not be toxic per se, but if you inhale dust in your lungs, it's not good for your lungs. So make sure you wear a mask.
We have a lot of masks.
Yes, now we have a lot of, that's the good thing about COVID, now we have a lot of masks. So wear a mask when you handle these things. Green sand adds some minerals, and it has potassium, which is the K, and NPK. But browsing online, I found that they don't all have the same composition of everything. But it could include the potassium. It also has iron, magnesium, calcium, which are other minerals other than NPK. These are the other minerals that need to be abundant in your soil. And then the mineral powder, this one is called Accelerate, but there may be other kinds. And the mineral powder adds all kinds of micronutrients, the minerals that are available in minute amounts, but that are essential to life. And we need to get them in our body to be healthy, and it has to be in the plants if we want to get them.
What's
and
the
absorb.
brand again?
This one is called Accelerate. But if you ask for a mineral powder that has micronutrients, it doesn't have to be this brand. Okay. So these things are powdery, and I'm not going to open them now because it makes too much dust. But there's little clumps in there, and I don't want my mix to be clumpy. So I take a cup of each, and then I use a very fancy tool. Some of you may recognize this. I sift it to get the powder, and then I put the big pieces back in my bag. And the big pieces can go in your garden if you want to, but if I'm making my seed starting mix, I really want this fine powder because you really want a dusting. It's like adding salt and pepper on your dish. It's just a little dusting. Well, you could do that, but I sift the whole thing and then I put it in a container, and then I can take like a teaspoon at a time to use. So I have the ingredients. I have some of the ingredients here. No, that's for soil. Okay. So you can. Do we need to circulate that? And then you can,
So this is it mixed together is the base fertilizer.
so we can circulate these things. And
I'm gonna pass that around so people can
That's
see.
what's in there.
That's the mix that Manon
that's-
just described.
So
is in
that's a little, I put a little bit of the mix into a container. So you just,
Does anyone have any questions while we're passing things around?
Yeah, is there something you can use instead of bone or blood meal if you have animals that will just destroy the yard once you put that in it?
The question is there something that you can use instead of bone and blood meal to get nitrogen so that other animals are not attracted, whether it's domesticated animals or wild animals? Yes, nothing is going to be as strong. There are vegetable-based or vegan-based things that if like someone's a veganic gardener that they would use instead, and that can be algae or seaweed. Also, alfalfa meal tends to be high in nitrogen. Not high in comparison to blood or bone meal, but higher out of a plant thing. Do you have any other suggestions?
the only other suggestion I have is fish fertilizer, but
That's even worse.
it's a liquid.
But my
It's
dog-
not a dust.
Is gonna go for it.
It's not a dust.
Yeah.
Hair has nitrogen. Throw some hair in it. Hair has nitrogen.
So I got a question for you. This is, not to change the subject, but I planted these zucchinis in my house, and we got like 4 of them. And it's just the basic, not anything in it stuff, you know, the
Potting soil.
starting stuff.
Potting
And so
soil.
now they're getting about maybe that tall. If I took, you know that Miracle Grow stuff that you put in water, it's like, it looks like green sugar, and you mix it with water. Would that be not a good thing to give them?
Well, that's a chemical fertilizer.
Okay,
Um,
that's kind of a no-no, huh?
it's just, well,
Let's
it's
repeat.
not what we promote.
Let's repeat the question quickly.
Okay, the question is, can we use Miracle Grow as a fertilizer in adding to the potting soil? He's been growing some zucchinis and indoors in a pot, and they're already this big, and now he has to add some fertilizer. Well, I would prefer adding a fish fertilizer or some other liquid fertilizer to Miracle Grow. Is a chemical fertilizer.
And
You're not gonna kick me out then?
you're not going to be kicked out. We're just
you
going to
can do-
persuade
you
you to
can do
go a
what you
different
want.
direction.
You
And
can do what you want. Just
worm
do it with
castings.
awareness.
Worm castings are another good thing
Good thing?
to do in replacement, because there's long-lasting nutrients, and then what you're talking about is like kind of an instant boost for it.
Yeah.
And I would actually push back to say
Worm
that
casting.
nitrogen is roots and leaves, phosphorus is fruit. So if you want your zucchini to get bigger, if your plant to get bigger, you want nitrogen. If you want your zucchini to set flower and set fruit, you might want more phosphorus. So a lot of people are just like, oh, douse it in nitrogen, and that's going to give you green leaves, but it might not actually give you the fruit.
Yeah.
That's where the phosphorus comes in, and fish emulsion is going to be a great option for that.
Yeah.
Well, I was just worried about it because it's so early that I'm just trying to keep it going until I can put it outside.
Oh, okay.
So it looks pretty good right now.
Yeah.
It's getting bigger though, so.
Uh-huh.
And you got a
You
couple
don't want
months
to
before it's going to be able to go outside, depending on where you live in the valley or if you have a greenhouse.
So it's pretty early for zucchini. You don't want to overfeed it, because if you overfeed it, it will grow bigger. When you start something too early, at some point, if you give it too much fertilizer, it will get too big too fast.
Yeah.
Or if you don't feed it enough, it'll get stunted because it has to wait so long to go in the ground. And
Okay.
so it's not to our advantage to grow them earlier than we need to.
Yeah.
I usually start them like in May, mid-May, not earlier than that, because I don't put them out. But it depends on your micro environment and whether you have a warm area or a greenhouse where you can grow them.
Kristen, question.
Yeah, I had a question about your fertilizer recipe, and just thinking about the gentleman's question, because sometimes I'll start seeds in the seed, the seedling mix, and then it's like, well, should I fertilize it, should I not? And I just wondered if a person could just sprinkle the fertilizer recipe in the top of the packaged seedling stuff, and if they could access it, the little plants could access it?
Well, by watering from the top, it will eventually, oh, repeat the question.
It's gonna be our new mantra.
Kristen is asking when she prepares her seedlings, when she seeds her seeds, if she can add a dusting right on top of that. You want these minerals where the roots will be. They don't need the food on the surface. So ideally, you want to incorporate it in your soil. If you put it on top and you forgot to incorporate, and after the fact you're adding it, well, by watering, it will kind of seep through. But ideally, you want it where the roots will grow, which will be a little deeper in your pot.
Other questions?
So are you saying to mix the fertilizer in with the soil?
Okay,
Be a
so
better idea?
That's the next step.
That's the next step. We started with the fertilizer recipe, and I'm not going to mix it here. But then I'm going to talk about the soil, making your potting mix. If you want to make your potting mix from scratch, you can use like 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 of these things, and that's approximate, and it's flexible. You can use peat, cocoa peat, which is like the outer layer of coconuts, the brown part of coconuts that they cut up small, and it becomes a light material. Or you can use peat moss. And here I have some peat moss. And peat moss is mined, it's sphagnum peat moss, and this is mined, which means it's dug into the ground. It takes a lot of years, like hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, to create peat moss. So we're mining it from the soil, and at some point some people thought, well, it's better to use coconut because we're not mining it, and it's something we have from excess coconut. It's a byproduct of coconut, so we're doing something with it. The other factor is that it comes, like peat moss comes mostly from Canada, but coconut comes mostly from far away, the other way. So in terms of traveling, I'm not sure which one is best. The quality, I think in terms of quality, sphagnum peat moss is really good in terms of quality. And it comes like a big bale. It comes as a big cube wrapped in plastic, and it's really compressed and it's really dry. And I bought some 12 years ago, again, when I bought everything else. And it lasted me a good 10 years. I mean, a big bag with. Because once you open that bag, it creates a lot of it. And it's very dusty. It's very dusty. It's a little easier to handle the coir, the cocoa peat. Anyway, so that's one thing. The peat moss is very acidic, so you want to add something that's a little alkaline to. No, it's a little acidic, but you want to add something to alkalinize the peat moss if you're using peat moss. The cocoa peat, I don't think you need to do that. So you can use either lime, but it's hard to buy lime in small quantities, but I use wood ashes. So ashes from burning hardwood, good wood, not the fake wood things that you put in your fireplace, but if you know people who burn real wood, you get a little bit of their ashes. And you only need a dusting in a big quantity. Again, you don't need much of it. And then compost. And it's best to use a blend of different kinds of compost. And the best compost in my mind is the compost I make at home, not the compost I buy. But if you're going to buy compost, try to buy different kinds and blend them together. And actually, a potting mix could be almost 100% compost. Things love growing in 100% compost, right? Everybody's seen things growing in their compost pile. But compost is expensive, and if you make it, it's a lot of work, so that we use it sparingly if we can. But you could actually replace anything else by compost. The perlite, it's actually a mineral that's been puffed up like popcorn. So it's a mineral, but it's very stable. It doesn't really add minerals to your plant. It just adds lightness. It's very, very light, and it adds lightness and
Aeration.
aeration. Yeah, it improves the aeration and the drainage, and it makes your potting your pot very light. So you can carry your pot and it's not so heavy. And then, so you mix, when I make this potting recipe, I usually make it in a big wheelbarrow. So it's like buckets, 2 buckets of each of peat, compost, and perlite. Or vermiculite is another thing that's similar to perlite, but locally we have more perlite than vermiculite in our stores. So you just put that in a container and you mix it together, and then you can store it in buckets, and then you have your potting mix. And again, you can sift it if you want a potting mix to start seeds. I can sift it. This is a little small, but a 1/4 inch strainer, like a French fry strainer. I use a lot of kitchen things. A French fry strainer is perfect to sift the potting mix to make the seedling mix. But otherwise, I use it as is for a potting mix to put in pots to grow anything else. The seed, it has to be fine if your seeds are very small, but if you have larger seeds, they don't mind a little coarser medium. So no, this is later, right? The seeding.
No, we'll talk about seeds.
Any questions on making the potting? So, and again, you can buy your potting mix and your seedling mix, but if you buy it, I would add some good compost that had live microbiome, or some compost tea, or a little sugar in it, and to really activate the microorganisms.
Questions? Ready to move on? Talk about seeds? Okay. So seed sourcing. Seed sourcing is another in-depth topic that we could talk about for hours, as we both are seed savers. We both recommend doing bioregionally adapted seeds. So when you order seeds online from some place like Johnny's, which I did right here because it's a big old thing of red clover, or Amazon, those seeds might be grown in Florida or Thailand or China or Hawaii or Alaska. They might not do that well here in Idaho because we have a cold, long winter and we have cool nights and we're really dry here. So when we get bioregionally adapted seeds, they're more likely to be successful here where we're gardening. So we both really recommend that. Is that me?
Hope not.
Okay.
I think we're good.
Testing. So I just wanted to talk about like the 3 different types of seeds that you might see if you are shopping online for seeds or shopping at our local garden nurseries. We have open pollinated varieties. You can call these heirloom. Heirloom just means that they've been growing for generations and generations. Open pollinated means that you can grow a plant, let it go to seed, and then save the seeds, and next season your plant will look basically the same as the parent. Hybrid seeds are not that. They're more of a patented kind of mix of different genetics from same plants that will create a hybrid seed, so if you were to save that seed, your offspring of that seed will look very different, or it will be like if you have a hybrid tomato, your parent tomato might be delicious and perfect, your offspring tomato might be mushy and weird and strange because it's not open pollinated. And then we have genetically modified seeds. We won't get into that because they're not available for home gardeners. So if anyone ever tells you, oh, you're growing genetically modified seeds, that's not true. They're only available commercially for farmers at this point in the United States. We might see that shift in the next couple years. Support your local seed library. Manon has been doing a great job stewarding the Wood River Seed Library. It's over at the Haley Public Library. I think you can also find the seeds at Building Material Thrift Store, Itty Bitty Farms, YMCA,
and Itty Bitty Farm in Cary.
And I have a slide to remind you to come to our seed and plant exchange a little bit later on.
And our seed library is based at the Grange Hall in Haley. And this year we've been very lucky to have Sage School students come and help us package seeds. And so far we've packaged over 1,000 seed packets.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And we give out seeds at like the 4th of July parade, and that's a big hit and tons of fun.
These seeds are produced locally. Most of the seeds at the library, or local seed library, they're produced locally by local farmers who are all volunteers who bring us seeds at the end of the season. And really cool. We give the seeds for free. We don't sell our seeds, we give them for free to local gardeners. And so you can get them from the different libraries. And we also have some seed exchanges coming up in April and May, which is on the last slide.
Yep. And then if I'm not getting seeds that I saved myself or from the seed library, I source my seeds from Snake River Seed Co-op, which is a commercial cooperative. It is all Intermountain West growers. They're Boise based. They're an amazing group. They do germination testings. They're not certified organic, but everyone follows organic standards. So if I'm ever gonna buy seeds, that's who I buy them from, and they're also all open pollinated. So if you were to buy their seeds, you can then grow it and save the seeds, and they will be the same as the parent plant. So I brought a couple seeds if people wanna look at like what seed packets talk about, but I think we're gonna go into that here. Because seeds can be tricky, especially if you're shopping online for seeds. The things that we like to think about are our hardiness zone. So Manon and I went back and forth a little bit on this. Currently, our USDA hardiness zones are zone 4 and 5 throughout Blaine County. It used to be zone 3. Climate change is shifting things. We even have some zone 6s up on the hillsides of the South Valley slopes. So that was really interesting to see that. The hardiness zones essentially mean the average annual low temperature. So certain plants won't do well if it gets down to negative 60 degrees outside. So your hardiness zone tells you what types of plants can make it over the winter.
Especially the perennial plants. Your annual plants, they might do the summer regardless of the zone, but if you have perennial plants, they might survive a mild winter. They might not survive a very harsh.
Right. And fruit trees, shrubs, perennial flowers, all of that are also dependent on that minimum cold temperature.
So I've got a question.
Mm-hmm.
So the higher the number, the colder?
No, the warmer.
The question was, when you're looking at USDA hardiness zones, is the lower number colder, higher number colder? Lower the number, the colder it gets in the wintertime.
Okay.
It's like the degree Fahrenheit, if it's a small number, it's cold, and if it's a big number, it's warm.
Yep.
Okay.
And I think they range from 1 to 10 or 11, 1 to 10. And there's some A's and B's in there. So we have some 4A, 4B, 5A, 5B throughout the valley. And there is a link to this, or you can search USDA hardiness zone and see the USDA map, and you can zoom in and get exactly where you are in your own home. And then we also like to think about days to maturity. That's really important in our growing area, probably even more than the hardiness, because we have a short season. Last year, I think my last frost, I'm down in Gannett, was on June 25th, and it got down to 24 degrees, and all my tomatoes were already in the garden thriving, so I was out there covering everything with bins and tarps and sheets and everything I could get my hands on to protect things, because while we think we have 90 days, sometimes we only have 60 days or 30 days. So that's something to think about. And you can see, I'm going to use my fun laser pointer again because it's hard to see on this. So these are Snake River Seed Co-op seeds, and they have right here days to maturity, and there is, I think like, what is it, 35 to 50? 25 to 50, is that what it says? Okay, hard for me to read from this angle too. So when you're shopping online for seeds, you can look for that, and if you have an assortment of tomatoes that you're looking at, and some say days to maturity 70 days, and some say 120 days, go with the 70 days. You're gonna have more luck getting ripe tomatoes doing that. Anything you wanna add to that?
The maturity, days to maturity starts when the seedling appears, not when you put it in the ground, right? So some seeds take like 2-3 weeks to germinate.
And Snake River Seed Co-op now also includes days to germination. So some seeds, like a lot of the brassicas, like kale, radishes, those germinate really quickly. Some seeds like carrots could take 2 to 3 weeks. So knowing your days to germination can help you gauge, oh, do I need a reseed? Oh, did I have failures? And you can maybe plant some more kale if nothing pops up after a week. Question, yeah.
If you plant carrots or beets or potatoes, how does frost affect those once something comes up?
So the question is, for different types of plants, carrots, beets, and potatoes, how are they affected by frost? Come to our next 2 gardening workshops, because we're going to talk about cold season and warm season. So carrots and beets are cold season, meaning they can handle colder temperatures, and then when you get into that conversation, there are frost tolerant plants, cold tolerant plants, and then plants that handle the cold but don't do as great.
So it's not whether or not they're doing their business underground. Like, you know, the fruit is underground as opposed to a tomato.
Yeah, no, so the question, I would reinterpret that for our live audience as, just because something's growing a root in the ground doesn't mean that it's cold tolerant or frost tolerant or warm season. And that's correct. Potatoes are cold or warm season. They will die in a frost like that. And then you'll get like mushy potatoes in your soil. Carrots actually taste better when they get cold because the sweetness comes out.
But you have to consider both ends. The cold season vegetables are planted in April, May, when we still get frost, and you can still put them in the ground, and they'll come up, and they might survive a frost. If it's a very heavy frost, they might die. So we have to know what kind of what stage they are, and when in doubt, cover them. If it's going to freeze overnight and you're concerned that your little seedlings won't make it, cover them. But you'd be surprised how kale will survive a frost. And peas, I've planted peas in March, and they've gone through like 3 snowstorms and deep freezes, and they still survive. So, and at the other end too, a carrot, once the carrot is in the ground, the carrot is on the ground and it's protected because it's in the ground. So it works at both ends, before the warm season, and at the end of the warm season, the carrots can actually spend the winter in the ground.
My question is, 2 years ago, when I was working with Sawtooth Botanical Garden and at the Y, you gave me some charts for this area. Are they still good because our zone has changed a bit? Do I need to worry about that? Because I have your, I got to go through all my paperwork and get organized.
I love it.
Is there new charts now, or we're going to just stay with the old ones?
No, the same charts. I mean, they just recalculated the zones based on the past 20 years of average temperatures. Our chart, we've been using them within the last 20 years, and so
We're gonna stay with them.
You know, the climate may be getting a little warmer. I haven't really felt that personally here. We're at a high altitude. We're at high altitude, and
That's the same.
no, it's
I
not.
laminated the charts, so I have them.
So our planting schedules is the same, but it's an average planting schedule, right? So, because some years are colder and some years are warmer, and
So you can visit 5bresiliencegarden.org to link to local planting calendars and schedules, as well as this plant and seed variety for our growing region. I think that's the University of Idaho extension. We have a couple different planting calendars and schedules. I think Linnea from the Hunger Coalition created one. Manon has one. We worked on one together last year for our workshop with Haley Public Library too.
They're there. And where is that?
5bresiliencegardens.com or .org. And we have a lot of resources, recordings, slides, etc. on there. Yeah.
So does this calendar/schedule, is it for include planting, starting seeds indoors? Or
Yes.
is it just for
It's
doing them
so
straight in the ground?
the question is, do our planting calendar and schedules include both direct seed and transplanting? And yes, they
Yes.
include both. That's actually something that is one of our considerations too, is some things get direct seeded and then some things would be transplanted. So seed
there-
starting.
So I have a schedule, my personal schedule here. So you have the weeks of the year, and then what you can direct seed at what time, and what you can seed indoor at what time, and when you transplant your seedling outside. And this is a chart where I only do one planting per season. If you look at the one from the Hunger Coalition, they do successive planting. So if you're into successive planting, you can use their chart, and because you can plant kale 4 or 5 times during the year.
And we'll go into more details about that type of planting schedule in our cool and warm season gardening classes later this spring as well. Like, you might want to start tomatoes kind of soon. If you wanted to grow onions, last month would have been a great time to start them. So I think getting those printed out and laminating them would be a great idea if you need that type of reminder. So just to quickly talk about direct seeding and transplanting. So direct seeding is when you're planting in the same place that the plant is going to go to maturity for harvesting or seed saving or whatever you're doing with the plant. Transplanting just means that you're planting it in a container and it's eventually going to go into its long-time home. There are some plants that do not like to be transplanted. Corn, peas, those things are less likely to love it, and it's based on the root system. Carrots, it's another thing, just doesn't like to be transplanted. And then there's plants like tomatoes that you pretty much have to transplant, especially in our climate, because you will not get fruit if you were to direct seed those in mid-June. And then there's also plants like, so this is my example of that Swiss chard here on the left, and that's planted out a month or so later in a garden bed. I could have direct seeded into the garden bed. I moved in May, so I had all my starts ready to go for when I moved into my new place with my new garden. So kale, spinach, lettuces can be direct seeded or transplanted depending on what your setup is, what you want to do. Maybe you don't have space to have a bunch of seedling trays, so you just want to direct seed. It's kind of, that's more about your own personal setup and needs and time. Seeding trays take a lot of maintenance and a lot of space. And
Cats.
And if you have cats, they can get into those and treat them like litter boxes. So that's all like individual personal setups and situations and resources help to determine what you can seed ahead of time, what can be transplanted. And then we have some basic materials for transplanting setups. So seeds, we have some seeds. We have the soil medium like Manon showed us earlier, or like this that you buy. Containers with drainage. Drainage is really important. You always want holes in the bottom of your pot to let water, or you will get waterlogged in there and your roots won't be happy. But it's really important to put them in trays. I've made the mistake of not doing that, and then you get a lot of wet, soily stuff all over the place. Obviously water, I always like to remind people to label things. It's really, like, I always think I'm gonna remember the 30 different plants that I seed, and I won't. I won't remember what I planted or when I planted it, so label. My favorite way to label is permanent marker and freezer tape, if you've ever seen freezer tape, because it sticks well. It's kind of moisture resistant. I like that better than any other tape I've ever used. Some people do plastic. If you have a cat, they might pull the plastic out. If you have kids, they might mess with your plastic sticks. So I like to tape right on my pot or right on my tray what I seeded. Go ahead, Manon. You want to say anything about seeding?
I'll do a demo of
Okay.
seeding.
I mean, I think we're at the last slide. So maybe I'll just quickly go to this slide. Save the dates for our future workshops. We have 2 more at the Haley Public Library here, April 14th and May 12th. So Kristen, of course, will send all that information out like she always does. And then we have 2 seed and plant exchanges at the Upper Bigwood River Grange. That will take place on Saturday, April 23rd and Saturday, May 28th. It's free. Plant start, seeds, fun, community. Come hang out with us and talk seeds and get seeds and bring seeds, and we'll do a big exchange.
And there'll be some local farmers with their plant starts that will come to and sell their starts.
Yeah. And you can get house plants there or cuttings of herbs. I always rely on Manon for my herb cuttings and then transplant them, or some bulbs too are sometimes available. So those are fun. And now we'll go back and do the seed starting demonstration.
And how are we doing with time? How are we doing with time, Kristen?
6:45.
Okay.
A quick question about your trays and seeds. So when I have done stuff from seeds, I was forever upsizing. Can you start your tiny seed in like that size pot? Or do you have to do them in little because there's like they don't like being in a big space?
No, it's not.
Repeat the question.
So the question is, what size of pot do we have to use to start seed? Do we have to start seeds in small things and then up transplant them in bigger root? The reason that people use tiny little cells and plugs to start lettuce, for example, it's because it takes less physical space under the lights to start your seeds. You know, if you start everything in a pot this big, it takes 4 times the space on your tray, and therefore you need more shelves or more grow lights. And it minimizes the amount of space and grow lights you need by having smaller cells. It also minimizes the amount of potting soil you have to buy if you're buying potting soil, or even if you're making it. So if you start with 6-inch or 8-inch pots for your tomatoes right away, it means that you need a lot of potting soil, and if your seeds don't start, you've kind of wasted that pot. and it takes a lot of space, and they're heavy, and you have to water a lot. So that's the trade-off of, you know, starting small. Typically, tomatoes we start in about this size, or at least 2-inch squares, and then at some point we transplant them at least once before it goes in the ground. But the other kinds of vegetables, we mostly go from our first seedling into the ground. But like if we have a zucchini that we start in something like this, and then, oh, it's not time yet to put it in the ground, I transplant it in a bigger pot. And it's not time yet to go in the ground, I'll transplant it in a bigger pot. Because if you leave it in a small pot, then it gets root bound and it gets stunted.
I'll just add 2 things. Use whatever size pot you have available.
Well, I
Because it's
I used egg cartons but
So that's,
then I was like, oh my God, they,
yeah, you're gonna definitely have to transplant egg cartons pretty quickly. And then my other suggestion would be that the bigger pot that you start with, the less handling of the roots. So the less likely you are to damage your plant or get root rot if when you transplant it into a different pot, you put the soil up too high and then your plant dies. So if you start with a bigger pot, you're less likely to cause issues that might hurt the plant that you've been nurturing for months before you get it into your garden. When I do my seed starts, I'll go from everything from the little 4-pack of cells to like double that size, just because that's what I have available and I had enough soil and I just did it. Some people are more precise and like everything to look the same. I like to use what I have. So yeah, other questions?
I have a lot of seeds left over from last year that I planted at home, and I've kept them in my fridge for the year. So what I thought I would do this year, which is what I did in Arizona, I'm just going to take a wet paper towel and start to germinate some of them. Do you all do that? They're all your seeds, though, from this area.
To
Repeat the question.
to check for germination, you mean?
Yeah, to see if they're still viable.
Oh.
We always,
The question is, if I have seeds from last year and I stored them in my fridge, how do I make sure they're viable?
Okay. And what kind of seeds? What kind of?
all kinds, veggie and flowers. I have lots of
Uh-huh.
seeds.
Well, seeds last much longer than we think they do, or they last much longer than the industry like us to think that they does. Except some like herbs and the seeds that are really, really tiny and almost like powdery, these seeds may not last as long. But most vegetables, seeds last.
5 years.
Oh,
I have
50 years.
Well,
Yeah, they last a long time.
Keep them out of sunlight, keep them out of moisture.
you guys keep yours in the fridge?
No, and that's one of the things that I would be concerned about with moisture
Okay, so
in the fridge.
okay, we did that in Arizona because it was so dry there.
Sure.
Yes, and that's the way we
Sure.
did it.
And then there are seeds, mostly like perennial flowers, that need stratification. Is that the right term? So that means they need to experience cold cycles to germinate because they're used to being in nature. So in nature, like we've just experienced in the last month, we get warmer and colder, warmer and colder. That's germinating. So we can make that happen in our fridges or freezers, but most of your annual vegetables do not need that. I would not store any seeds. Yeah, I would dark.
Like a closet?
Yeah, closet or a.
But I don't think it damages them to be in the fridge if they're in a sealed container that's moisture proof.
Yeah.
I mean, the seed banks, international seed banks, they freeze the seeds. They keep them frozen for years and years. So it's okay for them to be cold or frozen.
You just don't want like a packet like this in the fridge because that's going to get some moisture going on.
But if I put them in the fridge, I put them in a container.
I have some
Like I
glass
have,
and some packs.
container
Yeah.
or double plastic. But plastic is not as moisture proof as hard.
And you can test your germination by doing that method of paper towel. You can also test your germination by seeding it in a pot. And then if it doesn't germinate, you add more seeds. Because my thing with the paper towel is like, then you need to keep the paper towel when you plant it. So then like, are your paper towels bleached? Are they scented? Do I want that in my soil? Versus like a recycled brown paper towel might be a little bit nicer for your soil.
I would just plant them.
I'm good.
And I would just plant. But if my seeds are, I think they're getting old, I might put 4 seeds instead of 3 seeds in my pot. Put a little more seeds.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We have
So
5 minutes. Well, so maybe
before we get cut off, we
should we ask, like, do people need to see the demonstration, or do we have more questions that we want to talk about?
Yeah, I need to see it.
You all feel confident with starting with putting soil
Just
in your?
quickly, I just wanted to mention something. It says here, steps to seed starting. Fill the container with damp soil. So there are 2 ways you can either. Here I have my mix, my soil mix that I made myself. It's dry. You can either put the dry potting soil in your container and water it after, or you can add water to your container or to your wheelbarrow if you're doing a big quantity, and let it absorb moisture before you put it in your pot. If you put dry stuff into your pot, you fill the pot to the rim because it will compact after you water it. So it's quite okay to fill with dry, put your seed there, put some soil on top, and water on top. Water lightly, like not dump water on it, but just a fine drops of water. Or you could water from the bottom too, and it will absorb. Or you can do both. It's good to water from the bottom and then spray on top.
And see, I like getting the soil damp because then I can just dump a bunch of water into it and just mix it and then plop it in there. It's fast and easy and messy, but there are lots of different ways to do these types of things. And I think I would always recommend watering from the bottom when you have little tiny babies in there. If you water from the bottom, you're less likely to damage them or create little pockets on the top of the soil. And if you use this, I don't know if you all know what this is, seed blocker. You definitely shouldn't, soil blocker. You definitely should not water from the top like I did 2 years ago and destroyed my blocks.
So once you start a seed and you have a mix that's already wet, and you may sprinkle a little bit on top even if it was wet to start with, you leave it for a while. You don't water it every day necessarily. Some people will even cover with plastic or cover with something so it doesn't dehydrate for a few days, or put a dome on top for a few days, not for weeks in a row, because then it will just go moldy. But you leave your pot without watering for a while. And I go by weight, and when I add the amount of water that should be in there, and I weigh it. Okay, and every day I go by my pot and I just weigh it. Oh, it doesn't need, it still feels heavy. It doesn't need more water. It feels lighter. I will add some water at the bottom. And once your seedlings appear, then it's good to it's so dry here, it's good to mist them a couple times a day or 3 times a day. Mist them from the top. Once the seedlings appear, definitely remove the covers once your seedlings appear. Otherwise, they can have damping off, which is it will rot right at the line of the soil, and it will just fall over, and it will die.
And they also need air. They need air both to breathe, but also to strengthen them. So
yeah,
if you've ever
they
seen,
need wind.
Yeah, they need wind because it's windy here. So when they go out in your garden, you want them acclimated to the wind. And I'll just throw one more thing your way. One of the things I like to do with my seeds is I soak them in worm poop juice.
What do you do? All of them? Every seed?
I make it because I have a worm bin, so I take the castings and I mix it in with water, and then I dunk my seeds in there, and then I plant them. And I did an experiment 2 years ago on some that I didn't do that with at all, and then some that I did, and their roots were almost like vibrant. I mean, they were amazing roots, like the best roots I've ever seen from that method. So if you want to experiment and have fun, worm poop juice is one of my favorite things to use in the world.
Question?
Just as far as the instruction on the water and the moisture and for seeding, does that translate pretty much equal to direct seeding?
Direct seeding, you definitely need to keep the top of the soil moist until the seeds germinate, especially like carrots and lettuce. If they start germinating and then it's too dry, they'll die. So there are the seeds that planted deeper, like the zucchini, it gets its moisture from deeper. But the things that you put on top of the soil, which is a lot of flowers and a lot of the small seeds, you just put them on top of the soil, and you have to keep them moist. And here it's so dry, so the way to keep it moist is put a layer of fabric on top, and water through the fabric and shade it some way. And that fabric will also prevent the birds from coming and eating the seeds before they germinate.
And you definitely want your bed to be wet, moist, damp, not soaking wet. But you would not want like super dry soil and then to plant some seeds and just like sprinkle moisture on the top of it. You want it to be, I want to say saturated, but that's a little weird of a connotation, so like damp soil. You want to be able to pick it up and squeeze it and have it stick together a little bit, but not be sopping wet, but not be crumbling and fall all apart. Like a wrung out sponge is how some people describe it, but I always find that. I'm like, what does that mean? I don't know. How does my soil look like a wrung out sponge?
So if you start carrots, for example, they have to be wet and humid, and you have to spray them several times a day. It's not like once a day, it's several times a day. If it's a sunny, dry day, that won't work. You have to, commercially they would have sprinklers go on several times a day. Once the seedlings are up and the leaves are stronger, then you water only every day or every second day or every third day or every fourth day.
Do you recommend soaking those seeds that you're direct seeding before you direct seed them?
Not the carrots, because the carrots will take up to 3 weeks to come out, and I would not soak those. We soak the bigger ones, like the beans and the peas and the bigger seeds.
Okay, I think we're wrapping up. We're at 7 o'clock. Thank you all for being here. This was really fun to do this in person.
Please join me in thanking these gals.
Thank you for coming, and
That's all going to be on your site, right?
we're always open to questions, and my name is floating about everywhere with my phone number and email with River Seed Library. You can email us and we'll answer you.